If you watch the news during a presidential election, you'll hear a lot of this.
What do the national polls look like?
Hillary Clinton's nationally, Joe Biden is currently ahead.
But these national polls don't actually tell you who's going to win.
Throw the national polls out the window. They don't matter at all. What matters are those swing states.
Ah, yes, the swing states. Most democracies around the world elect their head of state with a popular vote, so whoever gets the most votes wins. But in America, we do it a little differently. The US is the only country that picks its president using something called the Electoral College. It's made up of delegates from each US state. When Americans vote for president, what they're actually voting for is who their state will vote for. This is why, every so often, someone wins the presidency without winning the popular vote. That's happened twice in just the past 20 years. The majority of Americans do not like the system, and haven't for a long time. Both political parties have made attempts to get rid of it. So why does the US still use the Electoral College? And who actually benefits from it? The Electoral College is based on how people are represented in Congress, where each state has a number of representatives based on its population, and every state also gets 2 senators. So, for example, let's look at Texas, which has a huge population, and Vermont, which has a really small one. Texas has 36 representatives in Congress. Vermont only gets 1. Representatives in both states each represent roughly the same number of people. In the Electoral College, a state gets the same number of delegates as their congressional representatives, plus 2 for each senator. So Texas has 38 electoral votes, Vermont has 3. But this combination makes the number of people each delegate represents way different between states. In Texas, 1 electoral delegate represents 3 times the amount of people as 1 in Vermont. And that makes each individual person's vote in Vermont a lot more influential. The Electoral College creates discrepancies like this all over the country. A voter in Wyoming is worth 3.5 times as much as a voter in California. And the winner of the presidential election is the candidate who gets 270 or more of these Electoral College votes. These are the results of the 2016 election by state. You're probably more familiar with this version of it, a map of red states and blue states. But this chart tells a different story. You can see that no state is actually all red or all blue. But almost every state awards its electoral votes the same way. The candidate who gets the most votes in a state gets all its electoral votes. If they win the state by 1%, they win 100% of the electoral votes. In 2016, more than 4 million people voted for Donald Trump in California. In fact, more people voted for him there than in any other state except for 2. But it didn't matter. Hillary Clinton got more votes there, so she got all 55 of its electoral votes. Clinton never even campaigned in California. Polling showed she'd easily win the state. Trump only visited Texas once. He knew he'd basically had that state's electoral votes locked. But they both visited Florida 35 or more times. That's because Florida is usually a swing state. Polls show that the vote there could swing to one party or another nearly every election. Trump only won it in 2016 by 100,000 votes, out of more than 9 million. Swing states have changed over time thanks to shifting demographics and political views, and it's states like these where presidential candidates spend most of their time campaigning. It also means these states have way more influence over the election than these ones. A study found that voters in Michigan had 51 times the amount of influence on the 2016 election as someone from a state like Utah. Voters in states like California or Missouri matter very little. Swing states are where the election actually takes place. They get the attention and the influence, and they only exist because of the Electoral College. It doesn't seem very fair, but the Electoral College has always shifted power away from some people and towards others. It was how it was designed. Back when there were just a few states, not 50, they had to get all the states to agree on the Constitution. One problem. The northern states, which were largely anti-slavery, wanted only free people to count in the population towards electoral votes, which they had more of. The pro-slavery southern states were worried that they would be constantly outvoted and wanted enslaved people to count in determining the population. As a compromise, they settled on something called the Three-Fifths Clause. It established that an enslaved person would only count as 3/5 of a person. In 1800, Pennsylvania, a northern state, and Virginia, a southern one, had about the same number of free people living there. But Virginia was also home to hundreds of thousands of enslaved people who had no freedom, let alone a vote, and ended up with more votes in the Electoral College than Pennsylvania. That year, those extra electoral votes gave the candidate from Virginia just enough to win. Even after the U.S. finally abolished slavery and eventually gave Black Americans the right to vote, white Southern leaders found ways to keep them from voting, like with discriminating laws like poll taxes and acts of violence. This meant they continued to have overrepresentation in the Electoral College on behalf of a large population that couldn't vote. The first time Congress attempted to replace the Electoral College with a simple popular vote was back in 1816. But senators from southern states blocked it, saying it would be deeply injurious to them. In 1969, Congress came even closer. Replacing the Electoral College had support in both parties and even passed the House, but it was blocked again by southern senators. A senator from Alabama wrote, "The Electoral College is one of the South's few remaining political safeguards. Let's keep it. Why change a system that historically had and still was benefiting white Southerners?" Today, the states that the Electoral College benefits have changed, but it's still making some voters more powerful than others. If we look at the states with a lot of electoral votes for not a lot of people, and the states with a little electoral votes for a lot of people, these states are a lot wider and less diverse than the rest of America. And many of these states are Republican strongholds. These tend to vote Democratic. That's one reason the two most recent Republican presidents have won the Electoral College without winning the popular vote. And since it's currently Democrats that are primarily disadvantaged by the Electoral College, they're the ones leading the charge to replace it with a popular vote.
Get rid of the Electoral College and everybody.
But as politics have changed, the people most critical of the Electoral College have too. In the 1948 presidential election, New York ended up being the major swing state. A congressman from Texas said, "I have no objection to the Negro in Harlem voting, but I do resent the fact that his vote is worth 100 times as much as the vote of a white man in Texas." Swing states change. What doesn't is that the Electoral College gives certain people more power to pick the president. And its biggest defenders have always been those who benefit the most from it. Thanks to Absolute, who sponsored this video to remind all Americans to make the time to vote. Absolute doesn't influence our editorial, but they do make videos like this possible. So drink responsibly and vote responsibly.
Hey there, students. In this lecture, I'm going to give you a quick primer on the key characteristics of the Senate and the House so that you will know for your government exam what are the key characteristics of each house and how may the two be compared. Shout out to Michael Link in Florida. Thank you for all the tutoring sessions and all that kind of stuff. I hope you do great. So let's go ahead and start off with the Senate. Alright, so first of all, the Senate is known as the upper house, alright, of the legislature, which was originally conceived by the framers to be more aristocratic. Remember when the Constitution was originally written before the 17th Amendment that senators were indirectly appointed by the state legislature instead of directly elected by the people. Now, of course, the 17th Amendment has changed that, but that house still has a bit of its aristocratic history in its traditions. So the upper house has 2 senators per state. That's because this house was intended to be the federal house, where every state, no matter how big or how small, has the same representation as a result of the Great Compromise. So 2 senators from California, 2 senators from Wyoming. 6-year terms. The intent of the framers was that the Senate would be an insulated body where they could debate the questions of the day and treaties and foreign relations and all of that kind of stuff in the style of the Roman Senate, but without the constant interference of public opinion, so that the senators can do what's best for the country, even if it may not be immediately popular. 100 senators, so the Senate is the smaller of the two houses. And it is chaired by the Vice President, who is not a member. The Vice President may vote to break a tie, but the Vice President cannot vote to create a tie because the Vice President is not a member of that body. And of course, the Senate has the tradition of unlimited debate. Being a smaller body with aristocratic traditions and all of that kind of stuff, that's why you hear about the filibuster as a distinctive feature of the Senate. Then, an impeachment trial will happen in the Senate. Now, that is once the House has already drawn up articles of impeachment. Remember that just because a president is impeached doesn't mean that they are removed from office. So senatorial courtesy here. This is a tradition in the Senate that when you hear senators refer to each other, the honorable gentleman from Massachusetts or the senator from Florida or something like that, that they typically will not refer to each other by name even. And of course, the filibuster comes from this tradition of senatorial courtesy, that someone has the floor as long as they hold the floor, that there are no time limits in speaking or anything like that. And then, of course, when it comes to nominations, the House has absolutely no role when it comes to the nominations of federal judges, of cabinet members, of ambassadors to other countries. Those all go through the Senate. The president nominates someone, and those people are confirmed by the Senate, with the House having absolutely no role. So confirmation of presidential appointments, that is a distinctive feature of the Senate. And then finally, by a 2/3 vote, the Senate may ratify or reject treaties that are negotiated by the president. So the point of the Senate here is to assist the president in his role of chief diplomat and make sure that the treaties that he brings back are in the best interest of the country. So now on to the House, which is known as the lower house. Now, of course, this was intended by the framers to be the more democratic house, the house that directly represents the people. And the representation in the lower house is proportional, which the intent here is for this to be the national house. James Madison wrote in Federalist 39 that the government that's being created is partly national, but also partly federal. There are 2-year terms. And so the point here is that this House will be more directly accountable to the people, and they are supposed to be responsive to popular opinion. The framers did not believe in democracy per se, but they believed in the Aristotelian tradition that the government should have a democratic element, and that's what's intended here. The House is a larger body with 435 members and chaired by the Speaker of the House, who is typically a member of that body, and I think always has been, even though the Constitution does not say, strictly speaking, that that has to be the case. There's limited debate. Now, of course, this House does not have the same aristocratic traditions, and also there are more people there. So arguments in the House, you have the floor for this long, and then you have to sit down. Now, of course, articles of impeachment are drawn up in the House. I've mentioned that impeachment trials occur in the Senate, but articles of impeachment are drawn up in the House. And so just because a president's impeached does not mean that the president's removed from office. That 2 presidents have been impeached, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. 1 president has resigned from office, Richard Nixon, in order to avoid impeachment and likely removal from office, but no president has ever been removed from office. Now, the one distinctive power of the House, besides drawing up articles of impeachment before they can go to the Senate, where cooler heads can prevail, is that all revenue bills must originate in the House. Now, remember, when you go back to the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. So revenue bills having to do with taxation must originate in the House, where the House is closer to the people, and the decision to tax should start with this more democratic House. So here are both of these bodies. If you want to pause it and just take a look, comparing, of course, the Senate is a house with a smaller amount of people. It's the federal house. There are these traditions of courtesy and aristocracy and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas the House is a larger body that is intended to be national in scope and more democratic and directly representative of the people. If you learned something, feel free to subscribe to my channel, TomRitchie.net, and of course, Twitter, Instagram, social media, and all of that kind of stuff. Until next time.
Have you ever wondered who has the authority to make laws or punish people who break them? When we think of power in the United States, we usually think of the president, but he does not act alone. In fact, he is only one piece of the power puzzle, and for very good reason. When the American Revolution ended in 1783, the United States government was in a state of change. The Founding Fathers knew that they did not want to establish another country that was ruled by a king. So the discussions were centered on having a strong and fair national government that protected individual freedoms and did not abuse its power. When the new Constitution was adopted in 1787, the structure of the infant government of the United States called for 3 separate branches, each with their own powers, and a system of checks and balances. This would ensure that no one branch would ever become too powerful, because the other branches would always be able to check the power of the other 2. These branches work together to run the country and set guidelines for us all to live by. The legislative branch is described in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. Many people feel that the Founding Fathers put this branch in the document first because they thought it was the most important. The legislative branch is comprised of 100 U.S. Senators and 435 members in the U.S. House of Representatives. This is better known as the U.S. Congress. Making laws is a primary function of the legislative branch, but it is also responsible for approving federal judges and justices, passing the national budget, and declaring war. Each state gets 2 senators and some number of representatives depending on how many people live in that state. The executive branch is described in Article 2 of the Constitution. The leaders of this branch of government are the President and Vice President, who are responsible for enforcing the laws that Congress sets forth. The President works closely with a group of advisors known as the Cabinet. These appointed helpers assist the President in making important decisions within their area of expertise, such as defense, the Treasury, and Homeland Security. The executive branch also appoints government officials, commands the armed forces, and meets with leaders of other nations. All that combined is a lot of work for a lot of people. In fact, the executive branch employs over 4 million people to get everything done. The third branch of the U.S. government is the judicial branch and is detailed in Article 3. This branch is comprised of all the courts in the land, from the federal district courts to the U.S. Supreme Court. These courts interpret our nation's laws and punish those who break them. The highest court, the Supreme Court, settles disputes among states, hears appeals from state and federal courts, and determines if federal laws are constitutional. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court, and unlike any other job in our government, Supreme Court justices are appointed for life, or for as long as they want to stay. Our democracy depends on an informed citizenry, so it is our duty to know how it works and what authority each branch of government has over its citizens. Besides voting, chances are that sometime in your life you will be called upon to participate in your government, whether it is to serve on a jury, testify in court, or petition your congressperson to pass or defeat an idea for a law. By knowing the branches, who runs them, and how they work together, you can be involved, informed, and intelligent.